I had developed really tight links with the powerlifting community because I started competing there in Auckland, New Zealand. Just great people, really tight knit. And I was able basically, like, my PhD research consisted of me driving around in my 20-year-old Toyota with the stadiometer, fractional plates, and a GymAware, which is like a more modern Nintendo unit, in my trunk, going to 5 different gyms that were the powerlifting gyms all around Auckland. So shout out to Get Strength, which is still going strong, and basically recruiting powerlifters who were nationally qualified. So if you look at all of the participants in the first 4 chapters of my PhD, they're all people who have qualified for New Zealand Powerlifting Nationals, the IPF affiliate we had there. So I was just basically feeling like I was a powerlifting coach for my PhD, and setting people up on these kind of modified daily undulating programs that had autoregulation built in, and seeing what happened. What does it look like if we do a mock meet and we use and get the RPEs on all these lifts as well as the velocity? How does it differ between different sexes, if there are differences? Who's more accurate and less, and why? What loads do powerlifters choose if we tell them, I want you to do a set of 8 at an 8 RPE relative to their established competition 1RM? How often are we seeing people overshoot versus undershoot, stuff like that? And that is what basically I did for the first year and a half of my PhD. And then that final bit is, we planned the study, we set it up to be done in 1 semester over at FAU. I flew out, lived out of a hotel, didn't see my wife for 10 weeks, the longest we'd ever been apart. It was hard, but it was really great. The Florida Atlantic University lab, the muscle lab, is such a unique environment. And some of the lab assistants who were doing their undergrad or masters at that time, they met me, I met them, and they ended up coming out and eventually became my PhD student. So one of the coolest moments I had was now Dr. Colby Sousa. I think he was either at the end of his undergrad or at the start of his master's. He was this young kid who was helping spot and load my participants in the study I did in 2016. And now in 2024, he just got his PhD because he was like, Eric, I love what you're doing. It's super applied. I did a master's with Dr. Zerdos, and most of the PhD programs in the States are less applied. Sports science kind of was a late adopter in the US because we're so focused on diabetes, clinical health, and the S&C profession kind of ends at the master's degree in the States. And sport scientists were not really as much of a thing, ironically, in the States as they were in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand. So, Colby was like, I want to come out to New Zealand. And I've had so many people who are different versions of where I was at when I came out to New Zealand, and the opportunity to give back to them. Like, hey, I'm going to pick you up from the airport, stay in my house for a month while you get on your feet. I'm going to show you the ropes. And if you want to do powerlifting or bodybuilding research, come on over, because I know how hard it is to get out here. I will bend over backwards for you, and we're going to do some cool muscle nerd stuff.
So what did you find after the study was concluded?
The biggest take-homes from my research were that RPE is probably not going to be an absolute game changer in terms of 1RM strength gains, especially when you control for things. Looking back on the specific training study we did, it was pretty good strength gains in both groups and pretty large strength gains. And I think to some degree, when you're giving, say, intermediate level lifters the ability to gauge RPE or use a percentage 1RM based program, so long as the percentage 1RM based program is sufficiently effective, it's going to make you stronger. And what has come out in subsequent research is that it's not the proximity to failure that matters when you train, it's the load on the bar. Now, obviously, you can't do 10 reps with 90% of 1RM, maybe 3 or 4, so it constrains RIR. So we often associate with being close to failure with being heavy, but it's actually the act of the load itself that is really driving strength gains, at least the principal factor. But the interesting thing as well is that there are glimmers in the research that autoregulation as a general concept, whether using velocity-based training, RPE, it can give tools to a lifter that may allow them to progress faster. And that is one thing we did see. It was an 8-week study, was that the RPE-based group was training heavier, not lighter, because the percentage 1RM program, it's basically predicting. It's making a crystal ball estimation. We had them at doing triples at 92.5% of their 1RM at the start. So something we think maybe they wouldn't be able to do for 3x3 at the end if they didn't get stronger. But of course they did get stronger. Almost everybody. And no one missed reps in the percentage 1RM group, not even on a bad day. So and we had them rate RPE, even though they were using percentage 1RM. So we could compare what their perceived proximity to failure was. So while the RPE group kind of steadily went up into higher RPEs and heavier training, just kind of a linear, programmed approach within a daily undulating programming model, the RPE group did that and their loads just kind of steadily went up. And eventually they were training with loads in excess of their original 1RM. They're doing triples with 101% of their pretest 1RM on average, something like that. But the other group, because we had to predict and we didn't want them to actually miss reps, they were only doing it with, 92% of their earlier 1RM, which ended up only being like 80% of their final 1RM. So they ended up training lighter. So you have to think that what that told me is that while that may not have shown up in terms of the actual differences in the post-test 1RM in that 8-week period, if you don't keep a firm grip on what is your current strength levels, and if you just go off an old tested 1RM, you're going to end up lifting with too light of a load to get the same kind of stimulus. And I think the perception at the time was that RPE is primarily holding me back. But what RPE can do and should do is that it allows you to let the rope out when you can. Like if you have programmed in a more static program, I'm supposed to do a triple with 500 today, and that should be, equivalent to maybe my 5RM, and you smoke it, you better call that a warm up and go up, right? Mm-hmm. The intention of the program was to have you at 2 RIR. And if you were at 5 RIR, do another set, right?
Yeah.
So that isn't something you can do in a controlled lab setting. Because you have to have a fair comparison to make some kind of conclusion as what's driving the effect. But the fact that we saw the loads kind of just diverge in the two groups, and that we had constrained these intermediate lifters who are making really good gains on this program, it makes you think like, okay, that probably wouldn't have continued if we'd gone more and more weeks. Even if we retest their 1RMs, you're just getting this like lag period each time where they're not lifting as heavy. Mm-hmm. And I think that would cumulatively summate over time to being a poorer stimulus. We didn't see significant differences between groups, but the effect sizes were a little higher in the RPE group. And small sample size research. And now that we have more studies on this topic, you can basically say that, hey, this autoregulation tool, it's not a game changer, right? If you lift heavy, you lift progressively. It's not like it's a completely novel concept. And it's not like in the trenches, there aren't powerlifters who are going, oh, let me adjust the load, But as we got into the modern era, the interesting interaction, I think, and this is extending beyond the conclusions I have from the research, is that if we're talking about kind of the 20 teens, people were writing programs. It's not like you were going on Wednesday to do bench day with all your buddies who would tell you, I think you need to go up. You have your more junior lifters, your more senior lifters, you have this group think and hopefully a nice synergistic relationship. And I got this when I was Olympic lifting, with the coach is going, let's go up 2 kilos there. Like I had my plan, but they are auto-regulating it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that happened much more naturally when you had these coaching groups and crews and teams who would come in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday for their lifts, and you do a little training on your own. But that stopped with the online coaching era. So you're getting a program that you're just kind of locked into and following that spreadsheet for the next 8 to 12 weeks. So I think what Mike T was doing and the research that I did supported that we're missing something if we move fully from the in-gym to the, on Google Sheets model of training powerlifters. We need to have some tools that can bring those critical elements to individualization and adjusting in real time to these types of programs. And now we're 2025, you've got your handler who is on live video for you at a meet, potentially. You're sending lifts on DM videos just after you do it to your coach, and they're telling you in session what to train or change sometimes. I don't think that's necessarily always the way you can do it in different time zones and everything with 50 clients, but it's so obvious to people that that's a key piece to training. It's not just set it and forget it. It never has been. And I don't want people to think that autoregulation is, did you know that you should adjust your load? Like, yeah, of course we knew that. But I think as we've gotten more divorced from the original way that powerlifting and strength sport was done, with a coach with you there with the lifting team and this communal approach to it, that we've had to create new systems to keep those elements that are important. So yeah, I think that's where the gold lies. And it's not revolutionary, but it is important. And it can allow you to progress potentially at a faster rate than you otherwise would have if you had much more of a kind of a rigid, traditional percentage-based, don't touch it, just do what the program says approach.
Yeah. Sticking on autoregulation, I'm going to define this very globally because it's kind of how I look at that. And this will be my bias. Then I'll have you poke holes in it, go down any rabbit hole out of what I'm about to say, because it's going to open a lot of doors. I've always believed that the difference between, an intermediate lifter or an advanced lifter is their ability to auto-regulate, right? So my statement will be, if you want to be great, you need to learn how to auto-regulate, right? Now, that's more from a global sense, and where I come from that is twofold. If we're talking about anchoring just in general, I'd want to anchor. How I would explain it is I need to anchor intensity. So percentage of a 1 rep max, the ability to straight 3, 2, 1, because it's kind of a different mental, physical component than, say, what a set of 8 to 12 could be.
Yeah.
That I would say we have to anchor effort. So I just kind of separate it, to effectively kind of guide somebody, how I would say the 2 RIR, 2 reps in reserve, for the low end accessories on a training day, big movements working into smaller movements. We have to be on the same page, right? And a lot of the times with the powerlifting group, they do a horrible job when it comes to the lower end things, when it comes to that, either from a tempo perspective, there's times when they should train more explosively, but there's also times if they're doing dumbbell side races, they can just slow the fucking tempo down, and get more out of that for what they're trying to do from that. But basically anchoring those two components are a little bit different, right? And then the ability to auto-regulate on the day, because that's going to lead into the recovery volume for the whole time period. So the way I'll explain it is act like this is a video game and you got a full energy bar going into first heavy training day of the week. And if we're to do that heavy compound movement, squats, I don't care if it's conjugate, whatever it is, but it's going to be a heavier, type of movement. You don't want that to take 70% of the energy bar.
Yep.
And if it does, then you're going to have to ditch the secondary movement and some of the other things, because you have to have some of that energy left to be able to carry into, say, the bench day, the next day or the day after that next day, right? So if you suck it all the way down, then what are you going to do? You can't really do that. Now, if it is at that 60%, then you can train that supplemental thing hard, but it would also play into if you're scheduled 5 sets of 5, right? Then where should that be after that? If it feels really good and it's still kind of on point percent-wise, RPR-wise, you don't jump and go heavier on the 5th one, because you have to think, how's that going to impact your ability to do what's rest in the session or what's going to happen that next day, which could be different movement.
Yep.
And the next week, the next time you're going to do that movement. So it kind of all plays in there. And what I've noticed with the more experienced lifters is they know when, and usually with them, it's backing it down, right? They know when to back it down, but they also know when, if it does feel really, really good, they can take that low hanging fruit. But if they take that and they have to pay, if they strain too hard, then they know how to change what happens after that, or even that next training session if need be, and I call all of that, like there's a lot of doors that just pop, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. I call all of that the ability to learn how to auto-regulate. And the struggle is how to coach and teach somebody how to do that, because it starts with what you were talking about, like just with the one movement or the 3 movements, because it has to start there, because they're going to be the highest energy demand and the most important. Yeah. But it also applies to all these other things as well, because maybe they go easy on that, but they're dumb as hell on what they're doing after all that, from the strength athlete side. So we'll stay on the strength, the power lifter, strongman side first, because the bodybuilding side, it's a little bit different, because you don't have that big anchor movement in there. That's what I would call high intensity. I define that as percentage of a 1 rep max. Sure. So that's, I know you get that, but a lot of people that are listening, I think at least in these communities, they convolute intensity and effort.
Yes.
You know, a bodybuilder, that's high intensity. And I'm like, it's actually like 60%.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So based upon what I just said, you can jump through any of those doors that you would like, because there's a lot of things going on in there. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm big on terminology as an academic as well. I almost always use the term load. Yeah. I think of like percentage 1RM, because then it kind of cuts across that. And then I'll say proximity to failure. And then because the intensity of a bodybuilder, they're talking about how close to failure am I, or just like, you know, how hardcore was the session. And intensity for powerlifters, they would do mean like the percentage 1RM. So I think the biggest thing I want to start with in relation to what you said is that a lot of people, they constrain what autoregulation really means to one variable, you know. So I have posted numerous times over the year, like, just because you use RPE doesn't mean you have an auto-regulated program. Mm-hmm. You know, that's load auto-regulation. But what about having a flexible template? You know, what if you have these 4 target sessions you're going to do, but you might give yourself a flexible off day, you know, based upon your recovery status, or you can flex in what might just be 3 triples at 80%. Call it a heavy practice day, and then delay the hard day because you feel trashed when you go in, right? Or how do you auto-regulate volume? You know, you need a system for all these things. And I think you're 100% correct that an advanced lifter can do some of these things, I'm going to say intuitively, but what I mean by that is that they just have years of pattern recognition.
Well, I think they get that way because they screwed up so many times that they know the consequence.
100%.
And what we're trying to do is to not have the younger lifters make those same mistakes.
Yes, exactly right. So, and that's the other thing I wanted to say is so much of applying autoregulation, it co-varies with being a good educator and a good coach and a good mentor, because you know what you would do if you were in their shoes, but you aren't in their shoes. You don't know exactly what they're feeling. You don't know if they have the same tolerances. They definitely have a different personality. And you need to be able to figure out, okay, well, how do I teach them the tools that I would use to adjust for myself if you're kind of coming from the athlete perspective. And coming from the educator perspective, it's very overwhelming to tell someone that, oh, anything can be auto-regulated. You know, like when you're given a simple program, like, oh, I squat on this day, I bench on this day, I deadlift on this day, or if it's bodybuilding, I have chest, back, shoulders, arms, it is easier to understand. There's less moving parts. Your ability to kind of be constraining your knowledge and applying it is very helpful when you're a novice learner. Now, you know, when you get more experience, and I could train, there's no reason I can't do lateral raises after my squats. Why not, right? And that can be freeing. Now you get away from any kind of dogmatic, rigid structure that provided the structure for you to actually think and understand your program when you're a novice. But now you're like, well, I'm going to break the rules because they're not helpful, right? They're getting in the way of what I'm trying to accomplish in this given scenario. And I think a lot of the times we inadvertently let novices think that those are rules rather than structures, right? So I think it's really important when you first teach someone how to be a power lifter or how to lift, that you are teaching them auto-regulation, but you teach it in a more structured way. So we're going to maybe start with not having a flexible template, but I'm going to give you a program that is relatively within your means, but we are going to auto-regulate load selection. So I want you to videotape it. I want you to tell me what your RIR is. I want you to stick to the load for the first 4 weeks as an example of how I might teach this. But I want you to be rating your RPE. I want you to be rating your RIR. I want you to be looking at the association between how it felt and how it moved on camera and the bar speed. So you can start to create those associations. So, right. So it's the initial phase where I start teaching people about auto-regulation. I might constrain it to one training variable, and I might have them focus on what are the things they need to pay attention to auto-regulate, but they won't actually change things yet, right? Mm-hmm. And then I want them just to think about how they feel. So you can give me a session RPE, like how hard was the whole session? And I want you just to report to me in our coaching relationship, where did you feel recovered? I want you to notice where you felt stronger, the same load moved faster or slower, etc. So now they kind of know what to pay attention to, and they develop an awareness of those skills before I'm asking them to actually manipulate the variables with those skills that they haven't even developed yet. Mm-hmm. So some of the first things I do towards that mastery that you've described of autoregulation is just getting them an idea of what are the things I need to even pay attention to, and developing the skill of accurately rating RPE. Because like, okay, so here's a video, I did a triple, I'm pretty sure that I could have only done one more rep. And I go, well, I think maybe you could have got two more. I think you might have misgrooved here, but if you'd kept things tight and done it again, I think you could have gone again. And then the next step is, okay, now I'm going to build in some opportunities for you to test the waters. So we'll do our 3x3 at 80%. You'll rate the RPE. You're going to keep the load the same. Now I want you to do an AMRAP. Now you're going to do as many reps as possible. So you just did 3x3 at 80%, and you told me that they were all 7 RPEs. But now you just blew up 10 reps. So do we think after those sets in fatigue that is actually an accurate gauge? Or did you get more hyped? Okay, now you understand the effect of getting hyped up and why we might use a training max versus a a hype max or something like that. So that intermediate phase is where we actually start letting the rope out a little. That's not letting. I truly believe also, if you're going to use autoregulation as a coach, that you need to take a more, what is described in the literature as an autonomy supportive coaching role, not this top-down hierarchical, you just do what I say, because that's a big mixed message. If you're telling someone to use autoregulation, you're saying, you know yourself better than anyone else. You have the keys to be able to, at least eventually, if you develop the skill, be the most individualized, best version of yourself. I can't be in the gym, in the kitchen with you on a day-to-day basis, but I'm going to give you the tools to succeed. So it's like saying to someone, hey, I'm not going to feed you fish. I'm going to teach you to fish. No, you're going to eat salmon. And it's like, well, hold on. I thought I was fishing here, So I think you do need to start from the very beginning with letting the client know that to some degree they're in charge. The analogy I use is that if you're a novice powerlifter, you're still the captain of your ship. Like, this is your goal. You've never sailed that far before, but I'm your seasoned navigator, and I like that analogy, because you can absolutely lean on your navigator. You're like, listen, I'm fresh out of naval school. I'm 20. You're 60. You're grizzled. You've got a parrot on your shoulder. You got a peg leg. You've been at sea. Like, you know what you're doing. I need to be the leader here, but like, you're my trusted person. I have brought you onto the ship for a reason. I've sought you out. Now can get away from the analogy. I'm paying you. You're an experienced coach. I value your expertise and I want your input. I don't just want a yes man. I don't want a wet blanket. I do want you to maybe tell me what to do, especially if they come from like a team sport background. You have to match them with the personality of what they want. But I think even if they ask you to step into a leadership role and they want to be the soldier, you need to tell them, what does a good soldier mean? So I get some athletes who don't like that more collaborative relationship. They want to listen. You're the boss. I'm the person. I'm gonna salute. And I go, okay, well, you're the team captain. If you come from this like team sport background, you're gonna need to make calls on you're the quarterback. You're the whole team. So you can't just follow whatever play we say no matter what. You got to adjust to the defense, right? So I explained to them that all of my expertise and if they want to see me as an authority in the relationship, I can only be good if I get the keys from them. So you are the person who is gathering all this data, and then I'm going to make a decision, and then I need you to tell me how it went. And if it didn't go well, you need to tell me that, because I can be wrong. So it's this fine balance of finding the right attitudinal disposition that gives the athlete what they want, but not letting them get to the point they'll go, listen, man, I'll drink blood. I'll do anything. I don't care. Like, you tell me what to do. I trust you 100%. Like, I don't want 100% trust. I want 100% communication. I need to know how things are working, and I need to gauge and change. Just as much as I'm teaching these autoregulation skills, coaching is autoregulation. Let's try this. It didn't work. Let's try something else, figure out why it didn't work. So no matter how you go about it, what it looks like in terms of like the leadership style, you have to let them know that they are the key to their own success, and they need to have that autonomy, and they need to be able to make decisions without your input, because that's just the nature of individual sport. You have to mentor athletes. It's not just do what I say, because you don't have the information they have, and you have to leverage their ability to be self-aware. And I don't know any good athletes who are completely body unaware, don't know how to look introspectively. I mean, even the freaks, they just get hurt or they burn out, right? Mm-hmm. Every good athlete I know, or more importantly, people who have maximized whatever the version of being their best is, regardless of whether they're 10th place at regionals or a world champion, they have this increasingly well-developed self-awareness. And I think that is the underpinning philosophy, coaching philosophy to autoregulation. So I think you need to teach that, even though at the novice stage, you're asking them to just stick to the program, please, but rate your RPE, send me videos, and we'll talk about it. And then in the intermediate phase, you're giving them more opportunities to autoregulate. I think it also fits well with the data on individualization. So we don't have a whole lot on strength training, but there is a fair amount on like endurance training. So you can auto-regulate like an endurance athlete's training based upon, say, heart rate variance. So HRV is this kind of metric that tells you about global parasympathetic or sympathetic dominance, your autonomic nervous system's recovery, and it tells you something about your overall physical state. And it's not very useful for strength because you can be feeling like dog crap and still hit a PR. But you can be feeling like dog crap and it will pretty reliably mean you're not going to be able to meet race pace, or you'll fatigue earlier, or you're more likely to get injured. So heart rate variance is an auto-regulation tool, that auto feedback tool for endurance athletes. And there have been studies showing that HRV guided training is superior to a fixed program. But there's also been studies showing that's only true if they're not novices. So individualized programs don't really make much of a difference when you're just adapting to everything. And the amount of fatigue you can handle or even inducing yourself is constrained. The amount of progress you can make is going to be rapid to some degree if you're just kind of in the right ballpark direction. So you don't really need to auto-regulate as a novice, but you will need to auto-regulate to be great, as you said. And you're going to, be kind of a late adopter if you get to this point where you need to individualize and you don't know how, because you've just followed whatever the program says, or you've just trained as hard as possible all the time, which is the two kind of directions people tend to go. They're too analytical. They just follow the program and they don't know how to adjust it when it stalls. They don't know how to individualize. They just follow what was on the paper, or they have just always trained like an animal and they get to a point where the cavemanning it is resulting in more injury than progress.
Well, that's the dilemma, right? Because they think they need to do what they did to get there when they're there, and sometimes it's inverse, what it is, because their skill and proficiency in the lift is also increased, so their ability to recruit more muscle at one time is way different when they're advanced than when they're novice.
Absolutely.
Which is going to take more out of them. To stay on the main lifts, what have you found with peaking of those main lifts going into, and then I want to get into like volume of not the main lifts, but hypertrophy and all that, but to conclude the powerlifting part, like what have you found with the peaking process?
Yeah, the peaking process is interesting. There's definitely some generalities that I have found from coaching a lot of athletes over the years, but then there are also pretty big individual differences. So as a general rule, and again, my experience is almost entirely restricted to raw powerlifting. So that probably matters. I have found that lighter weight classes, and I say that instead of what I might have said when I was younger, like women versus men, because now I've worked with 66, 74 kilo men and they operate in a similar way. Maybe it's because of the absolute load relative to their body, or something else. I don't know, but it's a pretty consistent thing I've seen when I'm working with like middleweights or lightweights equivalent lifters, that you can push that very close to competition. And if you don't, they can actually detrain a little bit and you won't be as fresh of a state. However, if you're working with a 105 kilo male, a 120 kilo male, a super heavyweight, which I have limited but some experience with, it definitely seems more like the era of what I heard from super training, or like basically going all the way back to the greats of the 90s, the 80s of, I don't do my last heavy deadlift until I'm 2 weeks out or 1 week out. So for example, Bryce Lewis, 105 kilo, 2018 world champ, he was someone who we adjusted his peaking schedule over time so that he pulled the opener practice for squat, bench, and deadlift occurred on different days. So we would be, I think, 4 to 5 days out and we would hit bench, and around the 1 week out mark, we would do squat, and then midway into that week, so 10 days out, we would do deadlift. And that's still pretty close to comp. And it wasn't like we didn't do anything else, but we were probably not touching anything over, 85% of 1RM on deadlift after that, and it would decline. And I found that definitely relative to the other lifts, less is more for the deadlift. There are caveats to that if someone is a conventional puller versus sumo puller, in my experience, with typically at a high level, people who are sumo pullers are also built quite well to sumo deadlift. Yeah. It's not like they're just poorly built for all deadlifts and they're trying to be less shitty and that, you know, their back's going to be toast no matter what. But they can stay nice and upright. Then, you know, I find that may even differ as well. Like you can push a sumo deadlifter a little closer to competition than a conventional. So in the general volume, you know, in raw powerlifting, generally I find the highest frequency and the highest volumes are going to come in the form of bench press, and then squat after that, and then deadlift after that. And those are the generalities, right? Mm-hmm. You know, but the amount of individual differences are pretty wild, you know, especially when you get unique anthropometrics, someone with like really long arms who is an amazing deadlifter. I have seen top level, like actually right now, Kjell Beckland, who is a 74 kilo world champ, you know, who's battling with Taylor Atwood back in the day, came back to the sport, dropped to 66 and put up a 770 total. It's a raw drug-free 66 kilo lifter, just annihilated the old world record by like 60 kilos. And I think when I was talking to him, he's from Norway. I met him back in the day when I was doing a conference out there. He was deadlifting 4 or 5 times a week, you know? Mm-hmm. But you look at his build and you're like, okay, that makes sense. You know, that's a block pull for everyone else, right? So there are always exceptions to rules, but the general thing I find is that those tend to be kind of just fixed in place relative to one another for the average lifter in these different classes at a high level. But then how you program really does change things as well. So you can choose to leverage a program that is a lot higher in volume or a lot higher in frequency if you regulate the load or regulate the RPE. And then you will find that they can peak a lot later if you pull back volume, the thing that you pushed, mm-hmm. right? And the inverse is true, right? If you're doing a really low volume and they can't handle as much, but they're very used to pushing quite heavy, then you can peak a little bit later and they don't need as much stimulus to hold on to it. Are you lowering the ceiling? Maybe, but you don't know until you've kind of compared the counterfactual over time. So I think you will find different peaking observations in different quote unquote camps of people, because if I love anecdotal evidence, but it's always constrained to the system you set it up in, mm-hmm. right? So if you have a group of people and they're happy to auto-regulate and they're happy to do it this certain way, but they always have an ME day no more than once or twice per week on a given lift, then you've constrained the amount of possible anecdotes they can see. So they can go, no, that doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work if you're only using 90% plus lifts on that lift 1 to 2 times per week, because now that eliminates a whole lot of other frequency and volume options. But if you're taking an entirely different approach, like our perception of what Shaco was, where we're working in the 70 to 80% range and you're training each lift 4 to 6 times per week, it's a totally different ball game. And you hang out with that crew and you go like, well, you know, you got to take your last deadlift 2 weeks out. And they're like, or you mean 2 days out? And you're like, what? Mm-hmm. You know? So you can find these very large differences in anecdotes, but they are embedded within a system that is more dominant in frequency or volume, or more dominant in intensity, or more sometimes like unique ones, dominant in frequency and intensity, but low volume per session.